So, I watched this great debate smackdown on capturing Christianity. Justin Bieber, or is it Scheiber? I'm not sure how I pronounce his name, versus Eric Hernandez. Now, Justin, I'm pretty certain, is a member of the very own Real Atheology crew and a member in good standing. And as such, he was a really perfect representation of the brand. Their brand, as I game it out, is he was civilized, intelligent, well-spoken, thoughtful, down-to-earth, easy to talk to, everything you always want in an atheist, and then some. It's really, honestly, too bad, because there is another type of atheist, need I say, that actually is more representational of most of the atheists out there. If all the atheists we had to deal with were people like Justin, the Real Atheology crew, this would be a lot easier, be a lot more fun. As it is, there's a whole cohort of Debate Me Bro clowns, like the ones, if you want to see them in action, go click on Stephanie's timeline, and you'll see the ones that basically surround her timeline, insult her 24 hours a day. I get my fair share of the Debate Me Bro. Basically, there's a huge chunk of atheists who are goofy and aggressive idiots. Honestly, that's probably 50% of the atheists are like that. I get my fair share of them, not that many, but almost any time an atheist comments on one of my videos, unless it's Answers from Reason crew or Real Atheology crew, then it's going to be like, the last couple of videos I put out on the resurrection. Do they even watch the videos? I'm not sure. They say all this, basically aggressive, in-your-face, goofy stuff, and I'm not even sure they listen to the videos. They tend to just hammer you away with atheist talking points, and they're not worth talking to, and they're kind of dumb. So that's on brand for atheism. It's really too bad, because the people like Justin Bieber here, Justin Bieber, if there's any way that you would categorize the guy, I would call him civilized and intelligent. That's the two most obvious factors about him. Just having normal conversation in mellow tones, doesn't raise his voice. He's just about substance and arguing, and he's really pretty sharp, and he's well-versed in philosophy. It's really honestly too bad for atheists, because if that guy was a representation of what atheism was in people's mind, atheism would have a much better reputation. As it is, we deal with atheists all the time, and most of them are these goofy idiots who jump on your timeline and insult you. You got any evidence for your sky fair? Yeah, those guys. They're not like him. And that's because of the Four Horsemen. It's really too bad for atheism that the Four Horsemen were what brought most atheists to the table. There was a big run-up in atheism, somewhere around 2002, 2003, mostly inspired by the Four Horsemen. That's when it started to become somewhat of a mass movement. That's when the numbers started that's when, most atheists started to appear in the popular culture. And most of those atheists are, Debate Me Bro, goofy, sort of clownish thugs, for the most part. If Justin Scheiber or Bieber here were what most atheists were like, atheists would be a lot easier to deal with. We'd have fun doing apologetics. Why? Because they'd be highbrow conversations for high-level chess players of very little interest to most of the people out there in the real world, to tell you the God's honest truth. This conversation was a philosophical conversation that was civilized and intelligent. There's very little melodrama, insulting, any of that. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He's about substance. And if he were what most people, if there wasn't a big, huge run-up in atheists because of the influence of the Four Horsemen, most people would be like him, call themselves atheists, would be like him. And they'd have a much better reputation. Be like, are you an atheist? Yeah, you're probably civilized, intelligent, smart, philosophical. You're probably down to earth and easy to talk to. As it is, like, you're an atheist? Oh, good Lord. What's this guy going to get in my face about today? That's how it is out there in the real world. I promise. My friend, I told this story, I think, in the past. My friend had a Facebook post about, something about real estate. And some guy jumps on the thread to start debating about real estate. And just by the way he was debating, I was like, dude, ask that guy if he's an atheist. And sure enough, as sure as the sun rises in the morning, because you start going like, you got any evidence for the claims you're making about real estate? I was like, that's an atheist. That's an atheist right there. It's an atheist. And it's too bad. Why? Because if there hadn't been a Four Horsemen-inspired spike in atheists in the culture, most atheists would be like Justin here. civilized, intelligent, mellow, easy to talk to, substantive, and everything would be hunky-dory here in apologetics land. Why? It'd be fun. You know, you can have normal conversations with Ben Watkins. And this guy's even more Ben Watkins than Ben Watkins. Ben, you know, I don't know if you're the leader, but you should give up control. give real ideology over to Justin here. Why? He's a better representation of your brand. He's almost 100% on brand. As far as I saw, I even watched the thing with him and Emerson Green afterwards. 100% on brand as far as I could see. Even when he was like, you know, analyzing Eric, he was still using qualifiers and, you know, analyzing, choosing his words carefully and just without insults, without melodrama, just what an atheist should be is what this guy is. Now, so that aside, let's get to the substance of what he was talking about. So he had three main arguments or three main arguments that I'm going to deal with. The interesting thing about him, which I'll just say as a side note, he also seemed to be somewhat smarter and more nuanced when it comes to philosophy of mind. They didn't get into philosophy of mind too much, but what I gather is he literally said consciousness seems irreducible to strictly physical properties. That was the words out of his mouth. Now that's the hard problem of consciousness in a nutshell. And I guess it's becoming more common. I know Emerson Green is smart when it comes to philosophy of mind, but when they were talking about it a little, when they were analyzing the debate, they were somewhat upset that Eric Hernandez wasn't giving him credit for a nuanced take of philosophy of mind, because Eric Hernandez kind of had this idea in his mind, and we all sort of have this idea in his mind. It's not our fault, it's atheists' fault, is that most atheists are dumb when it comes to philosophy of mind. They're cookie-cutter materialists / physicalists. Now, I gather Justin is not, but he didn't really stake out a position in this because that's not what it was about, so wouldn't expect him to. But that's why we talk like that, Emerson, if you're listening. Because it happens to be the case. You had a debate with a couple of committed physicalists, if I remember correctly. And that's what a lot of atheists are actually like. Really, really dumb when it comes to philosophy of mind. Now, Justin seems to be pretty smart. And they didn't really get into it much. But, you know, there is some ground there to be explored. And that's exactly what Emerson Green is doing. You have to come up with some sort of a different metaphysic in order to make it all make sense. That's why he became a panpsychist. Now, getting back to the topic at hand. So, Justin had three main arguments. The first argument, he said, naturalism is more parsimonious than theism. Well, not so fast there, cowboy. Big problem with, declaring that naturalism is parsimonious. Naturalism is parsimonious if, in fact, you know, there is no such thing as supernatural occurrences. The definition entailed in the definition of parsimonious is the simplest explanation that accounts for all the data points, that accounts for the world as it actually occurs. If, and that's a big if. So to say that naturalism is parsimonious presupposes that naturalism is correct, that the supernatural things that we claim don't happen. If you're right, yeah, then naturalism is parsimonious, but if you're not right, then naturalism can't account for them. And, you know, I won't go into it in this, but there's even more here philosophically. You know, Emerson Green may have been influencing him, who's more of a spooky naturalist. The problem with spooky naturalism, as what I've been exploring in some of my other videos, is even there, you know, what you allow ontologically speaking as an atheist, if you open the doorways too much to too many things that are transcendent and immaterial, okay, you start to get into slippery territory that is unaccounted for by atheism and not consistent with atheism. Now, they didn't go into it. This wasn't a philosophical debate along those lines, but as many of you who have been listening to my videos know, that's one of the things that I think is really fertile territory. So he declared naturalism more parsimonious than theism. If naturalism is true, it is more parsimonious, but I do not think it is true. So, therefore, there's no argument along those lines. You know, it can't really be made yet. Now, the two main arguments of his core presentation. I forget if he actually labeled it the argument from teleological evil. It's very similar to an argument that Ben Watkins presented. I forget exactly where, but it's, as far as I can game it out, is the strongest argument in the atheist wheelhouse. It's kind of like, you know, nature is so terrible and so violent, and it's the problem with the argument, okay? I don't think Justin labeled it the argument from teleological evil, but I'm pretty sure that that's the official title for it. The problem with the argument And this is a real problem. If you're an atheist, I keep in mind, let me caveat this. If Justin is the way atheists become and all the like goofy idiot atheists leave, I have nothing invested in what Justin believes or doesn't believe. I could care less. As long as he's civilized and intelligent, we can have philosophical, intelligent conversations about God or the lack of evidence of God from now until the cows come home would suit me just fine. I don't feel any need to convince him or win him over. Eric Hernandez seems to be somewhat of the mind that, the clock is ticking, and if he doesn't get right with God, he's going to burn. He's going to burn. He didn't quite say it, but you can tell that he's a little bit more of a traditional Christian along those lines. I don't think that is the case. So, Justin, if you're listening, you seem like a nice guy. I think you're going to be fine when you stand before the great Almighty. If it is the case that you have to officially have declared yourself to have believed in God before you meet your maker, to avoid, burning forever in a lake of fire, let's just say, burning forever in a lake of fire, then, it's being that God is omnipotent, I would think that there'll be perfectly presented to you an opportunity to get yourself right with God, wherein you'll go, oh, wow, you really do exist. Either, inspiring philosophy seems to think there may be chances after you die, maybe. I have no idea. But the long and the short of it, I'm not really worried about it for his sake. Why? Because I think God is going to be fair. Seems to me like a decent human being. Doesn't seem like he's, unless he's really good at hiding some evil tendencies that didn't show up in this debate, like he's in his spare time, like killing little children or something, then the guy should be fine. And if he officially has to sign on to Christianity, then God will figure out some way to make him sign on to Christianity, right before, sometime before he dies. Shouldn't be all that hard. Remember, the thing I said along these lines, the Apostle Paul, okay, a lot of people don't know this. The Apostle Paul was on his way to do what? To kill Christians when he had the Damascus Road experience. Does everybody know that? Okay, whatever Justin is doing, he's probably eating a lot of babies. He is an atheist. He's a civilized and intelligent atheist, but an atheist nevertheless, which means he is probably chowing down on the babies as we speak, which is wrong. Let me just officially say, yes, that's wrong. I agree. Okay? But he is probably not on his way now or ever to kill Christians, right? Okay, so he's not doing anything as bad as the Apostle Paul was doing. The Bible clearly says God is no respecter of persons, which means that Paul was a terrible human being prior to his conversion, and Justin Scheiber is a decent human being who just doesn't believe in God. And God is no respecter of persons, and the same Bible says, Apostle Paul says, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance. So we got to assume that Justin is acting in ignorance too, and God will cut him some slack. So I'm not really worried about his internal destiny based on the fact that he's an atheist now. A lot of Christians might argue with that, but God's going to be fair. God is fair. So I think God is going to be fair, and I see no reason to sentence that guy to eternal damnation. It just doesn't seem right. That's right, Craig. Yeah, okay, I agree with you. But the problem with his argument, having said all that, the problem with his argument is it isn't really an argument. It is the highbrow version. It's more of an intuition pump. Granted, it's one of the strongest in their wheelhouse. So if you're an atheist, there's a real challenge along these lines. Why you guys don't got that much ammunition to go on. That's why they do goofy, gimmicky arguments on the stupid set. Okay, as I've explained many times on my channel, the goofy, gimmicky atheists have a standard sleight of hand school of counter-apologetics where they run arguments that have nothing to do with the ontological status of God. This is the highbrow version. It's very similar in a sense. Okay, it's a very highbrow version. It's much smarter, 100 times smarter. Like I said, this guy is philosophically, he's really, really smart, really good, really intelligent person. The problem with the argument is it's more of an intuition pump. Okay, it's more it's more about how God acts in the world. And I get it. If you're an atheist, it seems really weird that God would have sat around for like 1 billion years or so, having a lion kill a zebra in this really brutal way, and there's no humans on the planet, and God just sort of sits around watching nature violently devour itself. It seems really weird and counterintuitive with the idea that there is some sort of sovereign and loving God. That's why I said this is more of an intuition pump, because we in the Christian community don't really think of life that way. And when we do, it's very rare. I'll give you an example to see if this makes sense, okay? just by way of analogy. Once upon a time, there was a band called Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth, if you do not know, probably most of the people listening to the video won't know the band. It's a little bit out of the box. Maybe Dave Rollins will, maybe Jay from England. Can't imagine too many other people will even know the name. Maybe Ron, possibly. But Sonic Youth is like, they're a little bit too experimental for even me. I like that type of post-punk type of arty music, sort of, but they were just a little bit too atonal and experimental. They have an album, Daydream Nation. You can check it out on YouTube. It's kind of like, there's no real melodies, and it's like, dang, dang, dang. And like, my brother-in-law actually worked with them. He put out one of their, I think he helped produce one of their albums, something like that. But I was reading a review about them, and this line stuck with me because this is actually the cuts to the chase. Okay, this music is what you imagine life is like in your darkest moments. That's his argument. What you imagine life is like in your darkest moments. I admit there's a whole school of philosophy predicated on this, where people just really think through. If any of you ever read any, what's his face, the German idealist, not Kant, but the other guy, Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was notorious about this, very deeply pessimistic, and only saw this like life as this brutal struggle of, death and destruction. And kind of that's how nature is to a degree. But there's a couple of problems with that as an argument. Okay, first of all, God is timeless. So the idea that God is sitting around waiting is, a little bit of a so what. It's kind of like a kid is building a model set and he's going to sit around and wait for the glue to dry. It's not that big of a deal if you're talking about a timeless being. Yeah, it's a billion years to you, but to God, what is it? Waiting for humanity to be introduced, which was his main goal, if that's what we think his main goal was. So it doesn't really make sense along those lines. And I get it. As I've said, it's a good argument in terms of it's a really good intuition pump to keep you an atheist. Like, if you're an atheist and you're weakening in your resolve and you go like, that Craig Reed is really starting to make sense to me. He says a lot of really smart stuff. And you're worried that you're starting to trend towards Christianity. You can start thinking about how, like, a billion years ago, a lion was viciously dismembering a zebra, and that doesn't seem to make any sense. That doesn't seem to make any sense with some type of omnipotent, loving being. But our intuitions as Christians come from the opposite direction. That's my point. So we don't actually zero in on life as that. We do the opposite. We see the perfection of, for example, the examples I can think of offhand, if you want to try doing an intuition pump from the opposite direction, put on Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, second movement, and just trying to prayerfully consider the perfection of what you are hearing, because that's not the only example. If you ever start thinking, well, God isn't perfect, there's a symmetry and a symphonic beauty to life as we experience it, not all the time, but a huge chunk of the time. And life seems on balance, totally and a good thing, profoundly good, and a gift. The fact that we don't necessarily have all the answers to why God did things or chose to do things this way or that way isn't a real problem for Christianity. I know atheists pretend that it is, but I don't agree. The burden of proof shifts. If you're trying to make an argument against an ontology, it has to be a legitimate argument against an ontology. In other words, I've said many thousands of times, okay, I'm not sure if this is all making sense. I'm just conversating. But as I've said many thousands of times, I did not become a Christian by anything other than religious experience. And I've had manifold thousands of those experiences. There's nothing that you could say along the lines of, well, isn't it weird that, it is weird. I get it. It doesn't seem to gel with a theological construct that there'd be evolution and animals would be killing animals to survive, and there'd be all this, blood and destruction would be part and parcel of the nature of reality itself. But that is part of the holiness and the mystery of God. That's my point. It's not something that is any challenge to anybody who has a real walk with the Lord at all. It's barely registers. Oh yeah, isn't that an interesting question? That's it. That's how it flickers across my consciousness is, oh, what an interesting question. I'll work on thinking about an argument for that someday. But the idea that I need to find a justification for that, or Christianity is somehow in trouble, is ludicrous. Why? Because my faith isn't predicated on me understanding every aspect of, that's the fallacy of apologetics to some degree. The Eastern Orthodox avoid this by they have a thing that they say that 100% agree with, that God is self-revealing. So it doesn't really matter if some smart Christian comes up with a good argument as to why nature would be red in tooth and claw, as they say. Okay, if God didn't reveal it to you, you don't know. And I'm not necessarily interested in your opinion. So if God didn't reveal to you why the world is the way it is, prior to God creating human beings, and why there was billions of years of, there were dinosaurs and animals eat each other to survive, and it just seems like there's cruelty baked into the cake to some degree. That was the gist of the argument, that there's suffering and cruelty baked into the cake to some degree. That doesn't necessarily need to be answered by a Christian. It really doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. It's a mystery. It's a question. It's not an argument. And that's where Cameron Bartuzzi is on completely firm ground, where he says questions aren't arguments. A mystery and a question about how God operates in the world, or how things are, is a question that's interesting, but it is not an argument against ontology. Just as none of the sleight of hand school of counter-apologetics are arguments against ontology. It is an interesting question about how, if there is a God, how God works and why the world would be this way. Sure. Doesn't cry out for an explanation. The atheist argument is contingent on the fact that it cries out for an explanation. I know I can already hear some atheists saying, yeah, it does. No, it doesn't. That's the point. No, it doesn't. It doesn't in my book. It doesn't cry out for an explanation. There might not be a legitimately good explanation. It might not need one. The Bible says as clear as day, trust the Lord with all your heart, cling not to your own understanding. And that is good advice. Why? Because there are a lot of things beyond the purview of our everyday lives. And part of being a Christian is letting go of all that. I understand we're doing apologetics, so we should come up with answers to some of these questions to the best of our ability. But the idea that if we don't, I've heard even smart-set atheists honestly say stuff like this. Well, Christian, if they can't answer this, they're really afraid of this because they can't answer this one. It's not our responsibility to answer it. It's our responsibility to try and give you coherent explanations to the best of our ability, but ultimately God is self-revealing. And if the Christian hasn't had it revealed by God and they aren't some special prophet of God, then they don't know either. That's not what it's about, is my point. So, having said that, let's move on to argument number 2. Same problem to some degree. Okay, argument number 2 is the famous Schellenberg version of the problem of evil. The hiddenness argument. Now, this is, again, similar problem. It's a lot more obvious that this doesn't lend itself to a properly structured argument. It is not, in the classic sense of the word, an argument against ontology. Why? Because it is contingent not only on somebody saying that they are a non-resistant non-believer. So Justin Bieber here, or Justin Scheiber, says he's a non-resistant non-believer. And to some extent, I accept that. If I were to categorize him as, he's a lot more non-resistant than, for example, Aaron Ra. Aaron Ra is 100% has a bug up his butt about Christianity, and that's clear as day. You mention Christianity, you got evidence! You got evidence! I said evidence! He starts freaking out and having a cow. And by the way, this whole idea that Christians aren't rational, he is not in any way, shape, or form a rational actor, just so you're paying attention. Just in case you weren't paying attention. Not even close. Okay, so is there such a thing as an established fact? I get that Justin Scheiber thinks that he is a non-resistant non-believer. And I get that there are some people who are more non-resistant than others. And in the great scheme of things, Justin Scheiber certainly seems like he's not resistant to God. And I would say the answer's from Reason Crew. So I'll give you the same thing I pointed out last time this subject came up. There's one person who was the most non-resistant non-believer. His name was Pleasure of Doubt. And I had this project with him where I was going to give him a series of rituals. And I said, within 5 months or so, you're going to come to some time of belief. I'm going to give you a series of exercises and rituals, and it's going to bring you to God belief. And he was game to try it. The first thing I did, now keep in mind, okay, Justin Scheiber is as non-resistant as I've seen atheists be. I'll give him that. The answers from Reason Crew are as non-resistant as I've seen atheists be. I will give them that. They aren't Aaron Ra. They aren't even close. They aren't irrational and in your face, and they don't have some weird bug up their butt about Christianity. A lot of atheists do. Well, Justin was willing to offer that and accept that. Okay, here's the thing. Pleasure of Doubt was the most, I even said this to him, you are the least evangelical atheist I know. He was the least inclined to have an attitude about Christianity. He was pretty much pro-spiritual, pro-religion. Okay, even with him, before I began the exercise and the rituals, we started out with me doing a series of interviews where I was giving him little things to do and then asking him questions. And I was going to do a series I did about 3 or 4 videos along those lines. I was going to do about 10. Why was I doing that? Because even with him, I was going to try to find and ferret out where the resistance actually was. I didn't buy that he was non-resistant. I said he was more non-resistant than other people, sure, 100%. But the idea that somebody would call themselves an atheist and they are non-resistant to God is dubious at best. And it has to be an established fact in order for the argument to work. It can't just be theoretically there are non-resistant non-believers. I agree, theoretically they may be and theoretically they seem to be. But in order for the argument to work as a properly structured argument, they have to be established fact, case closed, non-resistant. That strikes me as implausible. First of all, they wouldn't call themselves atheists. They would call themselves agnostic. Hello? Did everybody hear me? Did everybody hear me? It's a really good point, Craig. I understand that's a really good point. Non-resistant non-believer would not call themselves an atheist. They would call themselves an agnostic. Why? Because that is a much more hedges bet position. A much less I'm leaning this way position. That is much more neutral. So the idea that someone is an atheist who participates in counter-apologetics and they're non-resistant, I'm deeply skeptical of that premise. Maybe, but you can't have an argument, a deductive, logical argument contingent on a maybe. The premise has to be rock solid and established facts. Same reason I point out the flaw in the Kalam argument. What's the first premise of the Kalam? Everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? Okay, maybe. Same reason I think that argument is weak. Well, given what we know about quantum mechanics, Christians are going to argue with this. Don't bother arguing with me. It's not my favorite argument. Just let it go. Let it go. I love the argument. I understand. Let it go. I don't think it's that great of an argument. That's why. That's why. I'm trying to relate to the atheist, okay? If you're a Christian, stand down, stand down. You love the argument. Great, great, great. It works sometimes. Fine. Great, great, great. Do you understand the logic I'm bringing here? Okay, the reason why I don't think the Kalam cosmological argument is all that great is the first premise is an assertion. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Okay, maybe, as far as we know. But given what we know about quantum mechanics, that may not be the case. There is someone working as we speak right now, with quantum fluctuations to try and prove that some things can pop in and out of existence uncaused. And I've even heard that according to some theoretical framings of quantum mechanics. So premise one is flawed. Okay, premise one of atheist, the hiddenness argument is deeply flawed. Non-resistant non-believers exist. Maybe, according to them, sure. How do we know that they're non-resistant? Because we self-report as non-resistant. Okay, that's not good enough. That's my point. Human beings are famously terrible at self-understanding and self-revelation. I understand that the people who self-report as non-resistant are going to be a lot more non-resistant than Aaron Ra. Okay, but in order for the argument to work as an argument, they have to be case closed, provable fact, non-resistant. And I'm pretty sure that, for example, I was an agnostic when I was 25 years old, and I was in fact non-resistant. And how that was evidenced out in my life is that I actually started seeking God. That seems to be an organic occurrence if you are in fact non-resistant. If you don't automatically start looking for God in things, my guess is you are deeply resistant on some level that you might not have epistemic access to. Does everybody understand what I just said? I get it. You're more non-resistant than most people. You're mellow, you're civilized and intelligent. Technically, I'm talking to Justin Scheiber. I don't have to be. I'm not even sure if he's listening to the video. You're more non-resistant than most people. Sure, I'll give you that. But that doesn't mean you're non-resistant. Pleasure of Doubt was more non-resistant than any other atheist I ever met. I still was going to spend at least 10 hours trying to ferret out his resistance. Why? Because I was positive there was something there. I was positive he was there. I wouldn't call himself an atheist. And he would have already started seeking God. The resistance can be something mundane and silly. You could just believe the hype that Christians are irrational and kooky. So you feel dumb praying. Could just be that. That could be the resistance. I feel dumb praying, Craig. Okay, that could be the resistance. But that is still, in fact, resistance, is it not? The Bible clearly says, as plain as day, seek and ye will find. And I know for a fact that anybody who's calling themselves an atheist hasn't in the last 4 or 5 months sought. So non-resistance to me would probably entail some form of seeking automatically. Well, I did in my case. I wasn't a Christian, I was an agnostic. And it did entail some form of seeking long before I became a Christian. Some form of like pulling on the heart. You know, as the Christians would say, God was working on me. God was pulling on my heart. God was drawing me in. That's how a Christian would say it. That's what non-resistance would truly look like. Now, granted, that starts with the presupposition that God exists and God is like, and you're to some degree pushing him out. You know, God is not present in the life of the atheist. That is true. So they are telling you the truth in terms of that. They're not experiencing God, but they aren't looking for God. And for the most part, most atheists, even the non-resistant ones, spend most of their time reinforcing their non-belief on a daily basis. On a daily basis, clicking on videos and links and reading books that are going to make them less inclined to believe in God rather than seeking God. A non-resistant non-believer would start to organically start trending towards God. Again, and if you say, well, God is evil because he's, you know, commanding genocide in the Old Testament, that's resistance right up there. All the arguments are resistance. That's what they are. They're objections, okay? Some of them are deep-seated and you might not have epistemic access to them. That's the point. Just because you self-report as non-resistant, call me skeptical that you in fact are. And the argument is entirely contingent on you being 100% case closed, non-resistant, no arguments. Has to be a provable fact that you are non-resistant. And therefore the argument can't work anyways. But that's why it's not that great of an argument. So those are his two arguments. Those are the two of the strongest in their wheelhouse. And that's why I say if you're an atheist, you know, your work is cut out for you. Why? Because they're not that great. That's your best and your brightest right there. That guy is a really smart, honest actor. Okay, that is not a goofy idiot of an atheist. That's an intelligent and civilized human being. And, you know, I just don't see how I just don't see these arguments adding up to all that much over the long haul. You know, again, it's different with me because my belief in God is not contingent on any type of philosophical thing. It's contingent on direct experience. And there's literally almost no way that you would have to take the direct experience away from somebody to unlive their life for the last 10 years. But so there you have it, kid. You know, it was an interesting debate to watch. And like I said, as far as real atheology crew goes, you know, they should probably put him in charge, make him the mascot instead. Take Ben off from some of the tweets and put him there because he's more Ben Watkins than Ben Watkins. He's more on brand. I'm just playing. They're both pretty on brand. That's their brand. You know, they have civilized conversations, intelligent, really well thought out positions, and they sit around for 2 hours and they discuss things, and they cover the bases and they cover their tracks. So as far as that goes, you know, that's a top shelf atheist. That's as good as it gets. I'm just saying the arguments as they, you know, atheists, if you're listening, if you really want to move the needle, there's got to be a lot more to the table. You know, the reason why the goofy the sleight of hand school counter apologetics arguments work is because there's an unconscious stratagem was behind them. These people were not intending to have a strategy that was conscious and they were conscious of, but there's a stratagem that is in place and that's why they work. These highbrow arguments, they have to be arguments. They have to be structured so that there is no way out. I don't think it can be done, to tell you the God's honest truth. I really don't. I don't foresee any type of argument being made. Obviously, it's because I think God exists. You know, they say you can't prove a negative. Well, it's not, as many people will point out in the atheist community, that's not true. You know, theoretical physicists, Russell's paradox is deeply misleading, okay? As soon as you ascribe attributes and a locality to something, then you can in fact prove a negative. Why? Because the attributes have to match the locality. That's the essence of theoretical physics. They try to prove negatives all the time. They may even be on the doorstep of disproving or proving or evidencing very strongly that the string theory isn't true. In other words, there are no, superstrings undergirding reality that vibrate, yada, yada, yada. They may be on the doorstep of proving they don't exist. People say, you can't prove Bigfoot doesn't exist. Okay, the only caveat is If you can't prove the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist. If the Loch Ness Monster does exist, no, then you can't. That's the only caveat. Other than that, you can, in principle, prove a negative. Bigfoot doesn't exist. As soon as you ascribe locality and attributes, you can, in principle, literally prove that Bigfoot doesn't exist. You take the entire Pacific Northwest region. This is how you do it in principle. Can we do it as a matter of fact in today's world? I'm not sure. 20 years from now, yes. But I don't know if we could do it now, technology speaking. You take the entire region of the Pacific Northwest and you do a heat reading on every life form there. So you get a heat reading and then you match it up. Does it all work out? So it's like 100 kilowatts of energy produced in the entire Pacific Northwest. You go, okay, well, here's 1 kilowatt that's grizzly bears, accounts for the grizzly bears. Here's 10 kilowatts that accounts for the humans. And you match it all. If it all matches up and there's nothing left, then guess what? Bigfoot doesn't exist. It's that simple. We could do that in principle. I don't know if we can do that as a matter of fact, but we could easily do that in principle, and you can understand that that would be a way of proving, as soon as you match up attributes with locality, you can literally prove a negative. Why? Because the attributes have to match up with the locality. They have to be able to be sustained by the locality. Russell's teapot is misleading. It's misleading. Why? Because it's sort of pretending that the teapot is imaginary. Yeah, you can't prove a figment of the imagination exists, but you can prove actual facts. Why? Because the attributes have to match the locality. That's the essence of the argument from logical evil anyways, to make arguments to try and prove God doesn't exist. The reason why I think it's such a challenge is that I think actually God exists. Like I said, if the Loch Ness Monster exists, then good luck trying to prove that she doesn't exist, or he doesn't exist, or they don't exist. Good luck. Why? Because it actually exists. But you can prove a negative. They do it in theoretical physics all the freaking time. But how are these guys going to construct arguments that are going to move the needle to the point, a philosophical argument, to actually literally prove that God doesn't exist? Good luck. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's doable. I don't think it's achievable. As it stands, the two that Justin laid down are probably two of the strongest. And they're nowhere close to something that could actually move somebody who's really resolute in their faith for other reasons to non-belief. Do you see what I'm saying? And he's the best and the brightest. So I don't see how you could possibly come up with better. But I'll keep looking. I've said this in other videos. Christians, we're about 30% capacity. That's the good news for Christianity. If you're an atheist, you might want to sit this video out. That's the good news. 30 to 50%. Well, there's a lot of room left to run. There's a lot of unexplored terrain with transcendental categories and mathematical axioms and all things transcendent. We barely touched it. Huge galaxy of untraversed terrain. With atheists, they're about 80% capacity of where their arguments can go. There isn't that much left. Why? It's hard to prove a negative. Can be done, but it's really hard. And his main argument, the animals are killing each other and it's also violent and terrible. That's a really interesting question about the nature of reality and how could life be that way if God exists. But it isn't quite an argument against ontology. There's a subtle difference there, but that difference is important. There's a subtle difference. I'll give you that. But that difference is really important. You could not properly structure it in a way that you wouldn't see the flaws. Ditto for the Schillenberg hiddenness argument. Schillenberg hiddenness argument, I know the way it's structured. The first premise has to be an established fact and can't be. Why? Because we are relying on the person to self-report that he is non-resistant. Has to be case closed. We have to know for a fact that that person is non-resistant. There's no way we can do that. We don't have epistemic access to their interior life. So he could be resistant in ways that he doesn't know and we don't know. And that's more plausibly the case if they're calling themselves an atheist. They're resistant in a way that they have no epistemic access by themselves. They don't know where their resistance is. That's why they're resistant. That's why they're not Christians. Because they're resistant in a way that they don't really know is there. That's common with human beings, guys. It's common to people to think they're a certain way and not talk to your wife. All of you. You think you're a certain way? Ask your wife if that's the way you are. Because she'll tell you. And you won't believe her when she says, no, you're actually this way. You go, no, I'm not. Yeah, she's probably right. Why? Because she lives with you. That's the point. Most people don't know what's really wiring themselves in a deep way. Almost nobody does. Almost nobody does. It's not common to human beings. So to self-report as non-resistant non-believer is fine. Call me skeptical that you in fact are. Call me skeptical that any atheist, anybody who calls himself an atheist, that's already declaring a dog in the fight, that's already too much away from, I'm hedging my bets right down the middle, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced. It's already showing signs of some sort of deep resistance, whether it's present in the person's, above ground, or you can see it in the person or not. Aaron Ra, you can see it. If you don't believe me, go to Aaron Ra and say, Christian, you're so hateful, and the Bible is a book of genocide and hate, and you got no evidence. Just say that. Say Christian. That's exactly what happened. Say Christian. By the way, I'm a Christian. Watch him melt down. He can't even process the word without having resistance all over the place. The other atheists who seem non-resistant and are decent, civilized people, I'm not questioning them in terms of, they're checking to see if they're resistant. I just think there's pockets of resistance inside of themselves that they don't know are there. That's all. Therefore, the argument can't succeed. Why? Because the argument has to be a fact. Has to be an obvious fact. And it isn't. So, there you have it, kids. A little rambly, but, I think pretty much on point. It's cool. I suggest you watch the debate and then watch the discussion afterwards with Emerson Green. I guess they were having drinks in a hotel room, and I guess they discussed it right afterwards. So it's worth seeing. It's worth your time. Like I said, that as far as the real atheology crew goes, that guy is 100% on brand. If all atheists were like him, we'd have no problems as Christian apologists. Why? Because this would just be fun. We just have civilized, intelligent conversations with honest actors. And, at the end of the day, they go, do you believe in God yet? No, I don't. Okay, well, we'll try again tomorrow. And that would be the end of it. It wouldn't be all this complicated, stupid drama with, angry, aggressive kids, basically. Angry, aggressive, in-your-face clowns. There'd be none of that. And, if you're an atheist, it would have been a lot better for atheism if it was a smaller group of people. And that still may come, There could be a time where it trends away and most of the new converts to atheism go do something else, where their aggressive, in-your-face side is better served. Why? Because they don't care about the arguments at all. They don't care about philosophy of religion. They don't care about the truth. They barely watch your videos. They almost never watch my videos. They comment on them, but they just repeat tropes from atheist land. They don't really pay attention to they don't really engage. Be a lot better for atheism if Justin was indicative of how most atheists are, because then they'd have a good reputation. People like atheists are cool. They're smart, they're well-informed, they're nice, they're thoughtful. They'd have a whole bunch of things they'd say. Atheist, or you an atheist, and be like, oh, cool, this guy came to work and he was an atheist. It's great. Why? Because he's really smart, thoughtful, well-informed. He's mellow, he's nice. But as it is, guy shows up to work as an atheist and he's going to be wearing a t-shirt that says Christianity is stupid. And he's going to be like, you read the Bible? Are you kidding? That book of fairy tales is going to be an obnoxious little doofus. So, there you have it, kids. That's all for now. Mass has ended. Go in peace. Amen.